Welcome to Stories Mystics, your cozy corner for calm and comfort. Tonight, I'll share a tale to help you relax, drift away from the day, and step into a world of imagination. If you enjoy peaceful nights and gentle stories, make sure to join our family by subscribing, so every night feels a little calmer. Now close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let's begin tonight's journey. In the quaint shadows of St. Mary Mead, where tea-time whispers hide deadly secrets, a scream shatters the idyll of Ivy Cottage. Enter Miss Jane Marple, whose knitting needles unravel more than yarn. They expose murder, most foul. Prepare for the death at Ivy Cottage, Miss Marple's fatal discovery. Chapter 1. Whispers in the Willow. The lanes of St. Mary Mead wound like lazy ribbons through the countryside, their edges fringed with wild flowers that nodded in the gentle breeze, as if sharing secrets with the passing clouds. It was one of those rare English afternoons where the sun poured down like molten gold, gilding the thatched roofs and turning the hedgerows into living tapestries of green and bloom. Ivy Cottage nestled at the end of Willow Lane, a quaint haven that seemed plucked from a pastoral painting, its walls alive with climbing roses in shades of crimson and blush, thorns hidden beneath petals that promised beauty but delivered pricks to the unwary. The air carried the sweet, heady scent of lavender and rosemary from the herb garden out back, a plot meticulously tended by its sole inhabitant, Mrs. Eliza Hawthorne. Mrs. Hawthorne was a figure of quiet notoriety in the village, an elderly widow whose sharp wit could slice through pretense like a gardener's shears through overgrown vines. At 72, she moved with the deliberate grace of someone who had outlived most of her contemporaries, her silver hair pinned in a severe bun, her dresses always starched to perfection. Her herbal remedies were legendary: tinctures for aching joints, poultices for feverish brows, and teas that could soothe the most troubled soul. Or so the villagers claimed. But beneath her benevolent facade lurked a tongue that spared no one. She had a knack for unearthing buried grievances, often over a cup of her infamous chamomile brew. "Knowledge is the sharpest herb," she would say with a sly smile, her eyes twinkling like shards of flint. On this particular day, the tranquility shattered like a dropped teacup. It began with a cry from young Dolly Pratchett, the milkmaid who delivered fresh cream to the cottage every Tuesday. Dolly had rounded the corner to the herb garden, her pail swinging merrily, only to stumble upon a sight that drained the colour from her rosy cheeks. There lay Mrs. Hawthorne, sprawled amid her prized foxgloves and nightshade, her body as still as the stone sundial nearby. In her gnarled hand clutched a small glass vial, its label faded but unmistakable. Aconite, the wolf's bane, a poison potent enough to fell a horse. Dolly's scream echoed through the willows, a piercing wail that summoned neighbors from their cottages like moths to a flame. Word spread faster than wildfire through dry bracken. By the time the local constable, a portly man named Sergeant Haywood, with a moustache that drooped like wilting ferns, arrived on his bicycle, a small crowd had gathered at the garden gate. Whispers swirled among them. Suicide, surely. Poor Eliza, all alone after losing her Harold. But why now? She seemed spry at the market last week. And that vial, didn't she brew her own remedies? Perhaps an accident. Yet, amid the murmurs, sharper eyes noted anomalies. A teacup overturned on the kitchen windowsill inside, its saucer askew as if hastily abandoned. A single foxglove petal trampled into the soil far from its bed, its vibrant purple bruised and out of place. And, most curiously, A muddy footprint pressed into the soft earth near the body, broad and deep, the imprint of a man's boot, not the dainty slippers Mrs. Hawthorne favoured. Into this tableau of tragedy stepped Miss Jane Marple, the unassuming spinster whose cottage lay just a stone's throw up the lane. She had been en route to the vicarage with a wicker basket brimming with her homemade strawberry jams, the jars gleaming like rubies in the sunlight. Miss Marple was a fixture in St. Mary Mead, her slight frame often seen bent over her garden, or seated by her window, with knitting needles clicking away like the gears of a well-oiled clock. Her face, lined with the gentle etchings of age, held eyes of polished agate, sharp, observant, missing nothing. She dressed in sensible tweeds and a hat adorned with a single feather, her demeanor one of quiet benevolence that belied a mind as keen as a detective's magnifying glass. Oh dear, Miss Marple clucked as she approached the gate, her basket swinging lightly from her arm. Sergeant Hayward, mopping his brow with a handkerchief, turned to her with a nod. Miss Marple, best you stay back. Nasty business here. But Miss Marple, with the persistence of ivy itself, peered over the low fence. Poor Mrs. Hawthorne. Such a shock for the village. Might I ask, Sergeant, if you've noticed that footprint there? Rather large for a lady's tread, wouldn't you agree? And the teacup on the sill, still half full, I see. Odd for someone contemplating their end to leave afternoon tea unfinished. Hayward scratched his head, his moustache twitching. Well now, Miss Marple, we're thinking suicide, vial in her hand and all. But the prints a puzzle, could be the gardeners from earlier. Miss Marple's lips pursed in that familiar way, a subtle sign her thoughts were racing. Tom Digby, you mean? He does have sturdy boots, but look closer, the mud's fresh, not dried like the rest of the path, and that foxglove petal dragged halfway across the bed, almost as if someone stepped carelessly while arranging things. The sergeant blinked, caught off guard by her acuity. The crowd, hushed, ears straining. Among them stood Reginald Hawthorne, Mrs. Hawthorne's nephew from London, who had arrived unannounced the day before, tall and slick-haired, with a city pallor that clashed against the rural backdrop. He fidgeted with his cufflinks, his eyes darting like a fox in a henhouse. Aunt Eliza was despondent. He interjected smoothly, his voice carrying the clipped tones of urban polish. She mentioned feeling burdensome in her last letter, tragic but not unexpected. Miss Marple turned her agate gaze upon him, her knitting needles produced from her bag with habitual ease, beginning a soft rhythm. Dear me, Mr. Hawthorne, how thoughtful of you to visit just in time. Inheritance matters, perhaps. One hears of such things in the city papers. Reginald flushed, but before he could retort, Miss Lavinia Croft bustled forward from the throng. The village's self-appointed rose expert, Lavinia was a wiry woman in her 50s, her cheeks perpetually flushed from garden labours, her hands gloved even now. Nonsense about suicide. Eliza was plotting against my blooms again. Her herbs always overshadowed mine at the fete. If anything, it was that rivalry that did her in. Her voice carried a bitter edge, like vinegar in honey. Miss Marple nodded politely, her needles clicking faster. Rivalries can be poisonous indeed. I recall a case in Little Puddleton years ago, a jealous apothecary who tampered with remedies to discredit a competitor. Ended rather badly, with arsenic in the wrong jar. The mention hung in the air, stirring unease. Tom Digby, the gardener in question, lurked at the crowd's edge, his calloused hands thrust into his pockets, his weathered face shadowed by a cap. He said nothing, but his eyes, dark and brooding, fixed on the body with an intensity that spoke volumes, as the sergeant shooed the onlookers away and draped a sheet over the unfortunate Mrs. Hawthorne. Miss Marple lingered a moment longer, her mind weaving connections like the wool on her needles. The sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the willows in strokes of amber and rose, their branches swaying in a breeze that carried faint whispers, rustles that sounded almost like warnings. The village settled into an uneasy hush, doors closing against the encroaching dusk, lamps flickering to life in windows like watchful eyes. Yet for Miss Marple, walking back along the lane with her untouched basket, the seeds of curiosity had taken root. She paused under a willow, its leaves murmuring overhead, and thought of human nature's thorny underbelly, how envy, greed, and old wounds could bloom into something deadly. The day had ended in tragedy, but her quiet resolve promised that the truth, like a persistent vine, would eventually climb into the light. Chapter 2. Shadows over Tea. Twilight descended upon St. Mary Mead like a silken veil drawn by invisible hands, transforming the golden hues of afternoon into a palette of deep indigo and silver. The vicarage, at the rambling Georgian house with mullioned windows aglow from within, stood as a beacon amid the gathering dusk. Its gardens, meticulously pruned by the vicar's wife, exhaled the last breath of daytime fragrances, jasmine mingling with the earthy dampness of impending night. Inside, the drawing room hummed with subdued activity, the air thick with the aroma of freshly baked scones and steaming pots of Earl Grey, a ritual that masked the undercurrents of suspicion swirling like cream in a teacup. Miss Jane Marple arrived at the vicarage doorstep just as the first stars pricked the sky, her sensible shoes crunching on the gravel path. The vicar, Reverend Clement, a kindly man with wire-rimmed spectacles and a perpetual air of mild bewilderment, ushered her in with a warm clasp of hands. "Miss Marple, how good of you to come. The village is in quite a state after poor Eliza's passing. We've gathered a few close acquaintances for tea. Thought it might ease the shock." She nodded graciously, her agate eyes scanning the room as she settled into a chintz armchair by the hearth. Flames danced in the grate, casting playful shadows that leaped across the wallpaper patterned with faded florals. Her knitting bag rested at her feet, an innocuous companion that concealed the sharpness of her observations. Around the low table laden with clotted cream, strawberry preserves, and a tiered stand of delicacies, sat the key figures drawn into the orbit of Mrs. Hawthorne's untimely end. Reginald Hawthorne lounged in a wing-back chair, his city attire, a tailored suit of charcoal wool with a silk tie in a bold stripe, clashing subtly with the room's pastoral charm. His hair, slicked back with pomade that gleamed under the lamplight, framed a face handsome but hardened by urban ambitions. He toyed with a silver spoon, stirring his tea absent-mindedly, his blue eyes flickering with impatience. "Aunt Eliza was always so independent," he remarked to no one in particular, his voice smooth as polished marble. "It's a pity she didn't confide in me more about her troubles." Miss Lavinia Croft perched on the edge of a settee, her floral print dress mirroring the room's decor, though her expression was anything but harmonious. In her 50s, with wiry curls escaping a sensible bun and cheeks rouged by years of outdoor toil, she clutched her teacup like a lifeline. Her prize roses, once the envy of the village fete, had indeed suffered this season, their petals curling unnaturally as if cursed. Troubles? Eliza had a way of creating them, Lavinia said with a sniff, her tone laced with the bitterness of fermented wine. Her herbs encroached on my plot, roots twisting under the fence like spies. And now this. It's as if her garden's malice outlived her. Tom Digby, the gardener, stood awkwardly by the window, his broad shoulders straining against a worn tweed jacket. His hands, roughened by soil and thorns, bore faint green stains from forbidden plants like hemlock and belladonna, remnants of his work in Mrs. Hawthorne's more esoteric beds. In his late 40s, with a face weathered like old oak and eyes the colour of storm clouds, he shifted his weight, avoiding eye contact. "She paid fair wages," he muttered, his voice a low rumble like distant thunder. But she had her ways, dismissed my suggestions about the borders more than once. Miss Marple sipped her tea delicately, the china rim warm against her lips. She steered the conversation with the subtlety of a breeze turning leaves. Such a loss for the village herbalist society. Mrs. Hawthorne's remedies were unparalleled. Tell me, Mr. Hawthorne, did your aunt ever mention concerns about her finances? One hears of unexpected burdens in later years. Reginald paused, his spoon clinking against the saucer. Well, she did hint at revising her will, said something about ensuring her legacy went to worthy causes. I assured her I'd handle any city investments. Stocks have been volatile lately. His gaze slid away, landing on the flickering fire, but Miss Marple noted the faint tick at his jaw, a telltale sign of concealed strain. Turning to Lavinia, Miss Marple offered a scone with a smile. "And you, Miss Croft, with your exquisite roses. Did Eliza share any of her herbal secrets? Perhaps a tonic to ward off pests?" Lavinia's eyes narrowed, her fingers tightening on the cup. "Share? Huh. She hoarded her knowledge like a miser with gold. My blooms suffered blight this spring. Odd, considering they thrived before her new compost mix appeared. If anything, her remedies were more curse than cure." The words hung heavy, laced with an undercurrent of accusation that electrified the room. Tom cleared his throat, stepping forward into the lamplight. "Compost. I mixed it myself, nothing harmful. But she did experiment with stronger brews. Once caught her distilling something potent, said it was for persistent weeds." His storm cloud eyes met Miss Marple's briefly, a flash of something unspoken. Regret, perhaps, or resentment from a romance long soured. Village whispers had it that Tom once courted Eliza in their youth, only to be rebuffed for her late husband Harold. As the tea progressed, Miss Marple's artful probes unearthed layers like peeling an onion, each revelation stinging with fresh insight. Reginald confessed, under gentle pressure, to a recent loan from his aunt, repaid hastily but with interest that strained his London lifestyle. Lavinia admitted to a heated exchange at the garden fence just days prior, where words like sabotage had flown like errant bees. Tom revealed a grudge over a promised raise withheld, his voice cracking with the frustration of a man tethered to the soil. The conversation took a sharper turn when Reverend Clement, attempting to lighten the mood, mentioned a recent village find, a lady's glove unearthed in Ivy Cottage's compost heap during the sergeant's preliminary search. Odd thing monogrammed with an L, faded, but clear enough, perhaps Eliza's. Lavinia's face blanched, her teacup rattling in its saucer. L could be anyone's, Lucy from the bakery, or Lydia the seamstress. But her denial rang hollow, her eyes darting to her own gloved hands, one of which bore a similar style. Miss Marple set down her cup, her knitting needles resuming their rhythmic dance. Gloves do have a habit of wandering, like thoughts in a daydream. I once knew a case in Chipping Cleghorn where a misplaced accessory unraveled a theft. But here, it might tie to something simpler, perhaps a visit gone awry. The room fell into a contemplative silence, broken only by the tick of the mantel clock and the occasional pop from the fire. As the evening waned, the guests dispersed with polite farewells, their shadows stretching long across the vicarage lawn under the rising moon. Miss Marple lingered, thanking the Reverend before stepping into the cool night air. Her moonlit stroll homeward was a symphony of nocturnal sounds, the hoot of an owl in the elms, the rustle of leaves in a soft wind, the distant bark of a fox. She replayed the evening's exchanges in her mind, fragments coalescing like puzzle pieces under moonlight. That overheard snippet from Lavinia's earlier mutterings, "The foxglove was meant for the roses," clicked into place. Not poison for a person, but a deliberate sabotage. Foxglove extract, toxic to plants, smeared on rival blooms to ensure wilt and defeat at the fate. A petty act, but one that exposed Lavinia's venomous streak, resolving the mystery of the blighted roses. Yet, as Miss Marple approached her cottage gate, a fresh shadow stirred her senses, a figure slipping through the hedgerows near Ivy Cottage, cloak billowing like a phantom in the night. Not Tom, whose sturdy gait she knew. Not Reginald, too urbane for such stealth. It vanished into the darkness, leaving only the echo of footsteps and a whiff of pipe tobacco, unfamiliar, intriguing. Her hand paused on the latch, her thoughts igniting with new possibilities. The tea had cast shadows, but the night promised deeper revelations, drawing her inexorably into the heart of the enigma. Chapter 3. Threads of Deception. Dawn unfurled over St. Mary Mead like a meticulously ironed linen sheet, its crisp light slicing through the mist that clung to the rooftops and meadows. The village stirred with the tentative energy of a new day, roosters crowing in defiant chorus, while dew-kissed cobwebs sparkled like diamond necklaces strung between fence posts. From her fireside armchair in the cozy nook of her cottage, Miss Jane Marple watched the world awaken, her knitting needles idle for once as her mind wove through the labyrinth of alibis presented the night before. The shadowy figure she'd glimpsed in the hedgerows lingered in her thoughts, a elusive thread that tugged at the fabric of the puzzle. Reginald's polished evasions, Lavinia's brittle accusations, Tom's brooding silences, they formed a tapestry riddled with knots, each one begging to be unraveled. With the sun climbing higher, Miss Marple donned her tweed coat and a hat pinned with a sprig of fresh lavender, setting out for Ivy Cottage under the pretense of a condolence visit. The lane meandered past orchards heavy with ripening apples, their scent a tart counterpoint to the lingering pall of tragedy. As she approached, the cottage's roses seemed to droop in mourning, petals scattering like confetti from a somber parade. The door creaked open at her knock, revealing Reginald Hawthorne, his face drawn and shadowed by stubble that bespoke a restless night. "Miss Marple," he greeted with forced cordiality, ushering her into the parlour, where sunlight filtered through lace curtains, dappling the chintz furniture in patterns like scattered clues. "Such a dreadful shock for you, Mr. Hawthorne," she said softly, settling into a chair and producing a small bouquet of wildflowers from her basket. "Your aunt was a pillar of the village. Might I offer these as a token? And perhaps we could discuss her arrangements. Wills and such can be so trying in times of grief." Reginald hesitated, his fingers drumming on the armrest as he poured tea from a chipped pot. The room held the faint echo of Mrs. Hawthorne's presence, shelves lined with dusty tomes on botany, a half-finished embroidery hoop depicting a thorny vine. The will. Aunt Eliza mentioned updating it recently. She wanted her herbal collection donated to the Botanical Society, said it was her true legacy. His voice carried a rehearsed smoothness, but Miss Marple noted the way his eyes flicked to a sideboard drawer, slightly ajar. As they sipped, she steered the conversation with the lightness of a butterfly alighting on blossoms. Legacies are indeed precious, but burdens can weigh heavy. Debts, for instance. I recall a young man in St. Mary Mead years back, entangled in card games at the local inn. It led to such complications. Her agate eyes met his, gentle yet piercing. Reginald's cup clattered in its saucer. Debts. Well, London life isn't cheap. Aunt lent me a sum for investments, nothing untoward. I've repaid most of it. But his feigned grief cracked like thin ice, revealing the undercurrent of desperation. A gambler's hollow assurance. Miss Marple nodded sympathetically, her mind filing away the admission like a pressed flower in a journal. Venturing further into the cottage under the guise of admiring the herbarium, Miss Marple entered the apothecary room, a sunlit alcove brimming with glass vials and dried bundles suspended from beams like aromatic chandeliers. The air hummed with the pungent symphony of thyme, rue, and something sharper, belladonna, its dark berries glinting in labelled jars. But disorder reigned. Shelves askew, a row of vials rearranged haphazardly, and on the workbench a ledger with a page raggedly torn, its edges frayed as if ripped in haste. How curious, she murmured, tracing a finger along the spine. Mrs. Hawthorne was so orderly, this tear almost deliberate. Before Reginald could respond, a rap at the door announced Miss Lavinia Croft, bearing a covered dish of her famous rhubarb crumble. "Thought you might need sustenance," she said briskly, her wiry frame bustling in with the energy of a whirlwind. But her eyes, sharp as pruning shears, betrayed a flicker of unease as they landed on the ledger. Miss Marple seized the moment, her voice a soothing balm. "How kind, Miss Croft, and timely. I've been pondering recipes. Your crumbles are legendary. But did Eliza ever share her herbal infusions? Perhaps one for invigorating the soil?" Lavinia's handkerchief fluttered to her lips, concealing a tremor that rippled through her fingers like a leaf in the wind. Infusions. She guarded them jealously. But I may have borrowed a page once, for a wilt remedy. Nothing more. The admission slipped out, laced with guilt over a pilfered recipe that had promised rose revival but delivered only thorny complications. Miss Marple's gentle probing unearthed the truth. Lavinia's desperation for fate supremacy had led to a clandestine copy, now a thread tying her to the torn ledger. The morning's revelation simmered as Miss Marple bid farewell, the cottage door closing behind her with a finality that echoed her growing suspicions. But the day pulsed onward, drawing her to the village green, where the annual fete unfolded in a riot of colour and clamour. Stalls brimmed with jars of gleaming jams, their lids sealed like secrets. Buntings fluttered in the breeze like festive flags of truce, and the air rang with the laughter of children chasing hoops and the sizzle of sausages on grills. Villagers milled about, their chatter a lively counterpoint to the undercurrent of gossip about Ivy Cottage's shadow. Amid the bustling throng, Miss Marple spotted Tom Digby manning a booth of potted herbs, his calloused hands arranging sprigs of mint and sage with surprising delicacy. She approached with a smile, purchasing a bundle of rosemary. For remembrance, she quoted softly, her eyes inviting confidence. You must miss your employer dearly, Mr. Digby. Such arguments as you mentioned, over wages was it, can leave lingering regrets. Tom's storm-cloud eyes darkened, his broad shoulders tensing as he leaned in, the fate's din fading to a murmur. Regrets. Aye, we quarrelled fierce that morning. She shorted my pay, claimed the garden yielded poor, but I left by noon, went to the smithy for tools. His partial confession hung heavy, a half-truth offered like a wilted bloom, yet fate intervened in the form of old Mrs. Bantry, tottering by with a basket of raffle tickets. Overhearing, she chimed in with her quavering voice. At the cottage, you say? Why, I saw you lingering by the gate well past 2. Tom, peering through the hedge like a fox eyeing chickens. Her witness account crumbled Tom's alibi like shortbread underfoot, placing him at the scene during the estimated time of poisoning. A window narrowed by the sergeant's toxicology whispers. Miss Marple's mind raced, drawing parallels to a long-ago intrigue in Nether Wallop, where a scorned valet had framed his master's rival with a planted token. Human nature repeats its patterns, she mused aloud, her gaze falling on a crumpled note fluttering from Tom's pocket, scrawled in a hand mimicking Lavinia's, urging a secret meeting at the cottage. This note, forged, I'd wager. The ink smudges fresh, the script too deliberate, a red herring to shift blame. Tom's face flushed crimson, but denial faltered as Miss Marple's logic pierced like sunlight through clouds. The fate swirled around them. A pie-eating contest erupting in cheers, a brass band striking up a jaunty tune. Yet the revelation anchored the moment in tension. As afternoon waned into golden haze, Miss Marple retreated to a garden bench, the scent of honeysuckle weaving through the air like a comforting embrace. Her knitting resumed, needles clicking in rhythmic meditation. The loose thread from her skein mirrored the day's unresolved strands, but one knot tightened. The torn ledger page, with its forged entries inflating debts, pointed squarely to Reginald's handiwork, an attempt to manipulate the will in his favor. This momentary triumph, a deception neatly knotted, propelled her thoughts toward deeper layers, the enigma's heart beating stronger with each passing hour. Chapter 4. Poisons of the past midday sunlight streamed through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's parlor, transforming the room into a mosaic of delicate patterns that danced across the polished oak floor like fleeting memories. The air held the soothing aroma of lavender sachets tucked among her bookshelves, blended with the faint, musty whisper of aged paper from the village archive she had borrowed earlier that morning. Seated at her escritoire, a relic from her great-aunt's estate with drawers that creaked like old confidences, Miss Marple pored over yellowed letters and diaries bound in faded leather. Her fingers, nimble from years of knitting, turned pages with the reverence of an archaeologist unearthing forgotten relics. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily, a metronome to her thoughts, as she delved into the poisons of the past, secrets that festered like unchecked weeds in a neglected garden. The archives, procured from the vicarage's dusty attic with Reverend Clement's bemused permission, painted a vivid portrait of Mrs. Eliza Hawthorne's youth. In the 1890s, Eliza had been a spirited herbalist apprentice in nearby Chipping Sodbury, her remedies sought after for their potency. One entry, scrawled in a spidery hand, recounted a scandal that had rippled through the county, a youthful elixir brewed for a village fair intended to invigorate suitors at a midsummer dance, but tragedy struck when a rival beau, vying for Eliza's affections, ingested a tainted batch laced unwittingly with monk's hood instead of mint. The young man collapsed amid the revelry, his death ruled accidental, but whispers of jealousy and sabotage lingered like fog over the downs. Eliza, heartbroken and ostracized, fled to St. Mary Mead, marrying Harold Hawthorne and burying her past beneath layers of respectability. Miss Marple's agate eyes widened slightly as connections sparked like flint on steel. This fatal discovery, as the diary termed it, echoed the present with uncanny precision, the aconite vial in Eliza's hand mirroring the long-ago mishap. But was it coincidence or calculated echo? She traced lineages in a faded parish register. Tom Digby, it emerged, was the great-nephew of the ill-fated suitor, his family tree branching from that poisoned root. Reginald Hawthorne, as Eliza's heir, would have known the tale from family law, perhaps wielding it as leverage in his financial pleas. And Lavinia Croft, there it was. Her grandmother had been Eliza's confidant at the fair, the one who supplied the herbs, her reputation tarnished by association, breeding a generational grudge that bloomed into present-day enmity. Energized by these revelations, Miss Marple tucked the documents into her basket and ventured forth, the midday warmth enveloping her like a familiar shawl. The path to the churchyard wound through meadows ablaze with buttercups and daisies, their petals unfurling in the breeze like pages from an open book. St. Mary Mead's ancient church loomed ahead, its spire piercing the azure sky, gravestones leaning like weary sentinels amid yew trees that whispered eternal laments. She had arranged subtle encounters here, knowing the solemn ground often loosened tongues bound by propriety. First arrived Tom Digby, his boots caked with fresh earth from the fields, carrying a trowel as if it were an extension of his arm. He paused by his ancestors' weathered headstone, inscribed with faded epitaphs of untimely loss. Miss Marple approached quietly, her voice a gentle ripple in the stillness. "Mr. Digby, these old stones hold such stories. Your great-uncle's fate, tragic, wasn't it? A dance turned dirge, all from a misplaced herb." Tom's face hardened, his storm-cloud eyes flashing with inherited sorrow. "Stories, curses, more like. My gran told tales of Eliza's hand in it. Switched the vials out of spite, she said. Cost our family everything, land, honor. I've toiled in her shadow ever since." His admission poured forth a torrent of pent-up bitterness, revealing how the past's poison had seeped into his veins, fueling disputes over more than wages, a quest for restitution that simmered beneath his stoic facade. No sooner had Tom departed than Lavinia Croft appeared, her steps hesitant on the gravel path, a locket glinting at her throat like a guilty secret. She knelt by her grandmother's grave, brushing away ivy tendrils with trembling hands. Miss Marple joined her, offering a handkerchief embroidered with forget-me-nots. "Such devotion to kin, Miss Croft. Your grandmother's legacy, tied to Eliza's elixir, I gather. That locket, might it hold a memento from those days?" Lavinia's fingers flew to the chain, her rouged cheeks paling. "How did you? It's a lock of hair from the fair. Gran never forgave Eliza, said the scandal ruined her prospects, left her spinstered and scorned." The confrontation unfolded, like a storm building on the horizon. Lavinia confessed to harboring the grudge, her floral rivalries a mere facade for deeper vendettas, the locket engraved with initials that matched the doomed suitors, a talisman of unresolved wrath. Reginald Hawthorne strode in last, his city shoes ill-suited to the uneven turf, his expression a mask of contrived solemnity. He lingered by a hawthorn family plot, adjusting his tie as if to straighten his composure. Miss Marple's approach was direct yet disarming. "Mr. Hawthorne, family histories are like roots, deep and twisting. Your aunt's youthful mishap. You knew of it, didn't you? A story to coax favors, perhaps." His polished veneer cracked, eyes narrowing like slits in a drawn curtain. "Knew, of course, family law, but I never used it against her. She offered the loans freely." Yet under her steady gaze he faltered, admitting to veiled threats during his last visit, leveraging the past to pry open her purse strings. The sky darkened abruptly, clouds gathering like uninvited guests, and a sudden rainstorm unleashed its fury, a deluge that hammered the gravestones and turned paths to rivulets. Miss Marple sheltered under a yew's broad canopy, watching as the downpour washed away smudges on Tom's boots, revealing a sole pattern identical to the garden print. Not incriminating mud, but innocent clay from the churchyard itself. False evidence dissolved like sugar in tea, exposing a clever switch. The aconite vial, she realized, had been tampered with post-mortem, its labels swapped to mimic the ancient scandal. As the rain eased to a drizzle, sparkling droplets adorning the leaves like jewels, the suspects dispersed, their confessions hanging in the moist air like unspoken accusations. Miss Marple made her way homeward, the storm's aftermath leaving the world refreshed yet charged with electricity. By her hearth that evening, sipping cocoa laced with a hint of cinnamon, she examined a facsimile of the supposed suicide note, procured from Sergeant Hayward with a promise of discretion. The ink's uneven flow, the script's unnatural slant, clear forgeries penned by a hand accustomed to city ledgers, not village scrawls. This debunking, a cathartic unveiling of surface deceptions, washed away the illusion of self-inflicted demise, revealing the killer's brushstrokes in the canvas of crime. Yet the true perpetrator's shadow elongated, pulling her inexorably toward the bloom of truth. Chapter 5. The bloom of truth, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting St. Mary Mead in strokes of molten amber and deepening violet, the herb garden of Ivy Cottage transformed into a theatre of revelation. Fireflies began their tentative waltz among the foxgloves and nightshade, their glow mimicking the stars that pricked the velvet sky overhead. Miss Jane Marple had orchestrated this gathering with the precision of a composer arranging notes for a grand finale, sending discreet notes via the village postboy to summon the key players. The air thrummed with the evening chorus of crickets, a natural underscore to the tension that coiled like vines around the assembled group. Torches flickered along the garden path, casting elongated shadows that twisted like conspirators, while the scent of blooming jasmine wove through the cooler notes of damp earth, a fragrant veil over the impending storm of truth. Reginald Hawthorne arrived first, his London polish dulled by the rural dusk, his tie askew as if the day's revelations had unravelled his composure. He paced the flagstone terrace, hands thrust into pockets that jingled faintly with loose change, a nervous tick betraying his gambler's soul. Lavinia Croft followed, her steps clipped and purposeful, the locket at her throat catching torchlight like an accusatory beacon. She clutched a shawl against the evening chill, her wiry curls haloed in the glow, eyes darting as if seeking escape among the herb beds. Tom Digby lumbered in last, his gardener's frame silhouetted against the fading light, carrying a lantern that swung like a pendulum, illuminating the calluses on his hands, marks of toil and unspoken legacies. Miss Marple stood at the garden's heart, beside the stone sundial, where Mrs. Hawthorne's body had been discovered, her slight figure a pillar of quiet authority. She wore a simple woolen cardigan against the breeze, her hat's feather stirring gently, as if attuned to the whispers of the wind. Sergeant Hayward hovered nearby, his uniform starched and official, a notebook poised like a weapon. "Thank you all for coming," Miss Marple began, her voice carrying the calm assurance of one who had navigated countless human tempests. "Under these stars, which have witnessed centuries of village secrets, it's fitting we lay bare the truth about poor Eliza's end. Not suicide, as the vial suggested, nor accident from her own hand, but murder, crafted with the subtlety of a master herbalist blending essences." The group shifted uneasily, shadows playing across their faces like masks slipping in the torchlight. Reginald cleared his throat, his voice edged with impatience. "Murder? Preposterous. Aunt was alone that afternoon, her remedies turned against her, perhaps." Miss Marple's agate eyes gleamed, reflecting the firefly's dance. "Alone. Appearances deceive like a benign bloom hiding thorns. Let us trace the roots. The aconite vial, clutched so convincingly, yet its label, swapped in haste, echoed a scandal from 1890's chipping Sodbury. An elixir gone awry, felling a suitor amid a midsummer whirl. Eliza's youthful error, but one that sowed seeds of vengeance across generations. Tom's lantern trembled, casting erratic beams. That old tale, my kin paid the price, but I didn't brew her fate. Indeed not, Miss Marple agreed, her tone a soothing balm. Your grudge simmered, Mr. Digby, like compost fermenting in the sun. Wages withheld, ancestry slighted. Yet your boots, washed clean by yesterday's storm, bore clay from the churchyard, not the garden's incriminating mud. A misdirection, planted like a decoy weed. Lavinia's shawl slipped slightly, her fingers twisting the fabric. Then who? Reginald, with his city schemes and forged ledgers. Miss Marple turned, her gaze steady as the sundial's shadow. Mr. Hawthorne's forgeries inflated debts to sway the will, a gambler's desperate ploy, but greed alone doesn't distill poison. No, the elixir's echo points elsewhere, to a locket's hidden hair, a grandmother's tarnished name. Lavinia's face drained of colour, the torchlight hollowing her cheeks like a carved pumpkin. What nonsense! That scandal ruined Gran, yes, left her shunned, her life a barren plot. But Eliza paid her dues. Paid, or evaded. Miss Marple pressed, stepping closer, the jasmine's perfume intensifying as if nature itself amplified the drama. Your floral rivalries were petals over thorns, a facade for decades of simmering wrath, the monogrammed glove in the compost, not lost but discarded in panic. Yours, Miss Croft, with threads matching your gardening pair, the torn ledger page, not Reginald's hand alone but yours, appending blackmail notes veiled as recipes, demanding restitution for ancestral wrongs. Reginald's eyes widened, piecing fragments like shards of a shattered vase. Blackmail. Aunt mentioned odd demands, thought it was village prattle. Prattle with purpose, Miss Marple continued, her voice rising like the crescendo of the cricket's song. The overheard whisper at tea. The foxglove was meant for the roses, not mere sabotage, but a slip revealing your intent. You refined Eliza's old elixir recipe, distilling a potent variant from her own stores, aconite masked in chamomile, administered during a feigned neighborly visit. A cup shared on the windowsill, overturned in her final throes, while you arranged the scene. Vial planted, footprint stamped with a borrowed boot to implicate Tom. Lavinia's defiance cracked, her voice a ragged whisper amid the firefly's glow. She stole Gran's future. That elixir was her jealousy manifest, switched vials to claim the suitor for herself. I only sought justice, a taste of her own brew. Tom stepped forward, his lantern steady now, illuminating Lavinia's trembling form. Justice, or murder cloaked in petals, my blood paid enough, no need for more. Sergeant Haywood flipped his notebook shut with a snap that echoed like a gavel. Miss Croft, you'll come with me. Evidence stacks like cordwood, glove, notes, the distillate residue in your shed, as the search will confirm. As Haywood led Lavinia away, her shawl trailing like a defeated banner, the garden exhaled a collective sigh. Reginald slumped against the terrace rail, relief mingling with remorse. I pushed her with my demands, drove her to desperation. Human frailties intertwine like roots, Miss Marple said softly, her eyes on the stars. Yours for fortune, Tom's for heritage, Lavinia's for retribution. Yet forgiveness is the truest remedy, lest poisons linger. Tom nodded, extinguishing his lantern as the moon rose fuller, bathing the herbs in silver. I'll tend the garden proper now, let it heal. The group dispersed into the night, footsteps fading along the lanes, leaving Miss Marple alone amid the blooms. She wandered the paths, fingers brushing petals that unfurled under moonlight, their resilience a quiet testament to renewal. Fireflies swirled in farewell, and the jasmine's scent softened to a lullaby. Back at her cottage, she settled by the window, knitting needles resuming their dance, the yarn a metaphor for life's tangled skeins, now neatly resolved. St. Mary Mead slumbered peacefully, its rhythms restored. Morning would bring birdsong and fresh bread from the bakery, the fates' echoes fading into folklore. Miss Marple's fatal discovery had unearthed not just a killer, but the enduring patterns of the human heart, envy blooming into malice but truth, like a steadfast rose, enduring thorns to reveal its beauty. Under the benevolent moon, Ivy Cottage's garden stirred gently, roses nodding in agreement, their petals a promise of tomorrows, unshadowed by yesterday's poisons.